Thank you, Mr. President. I would start by saying that the difficulty with corruption is that it is notoriously difficult to measure. People feel that there is huge corruption all over Europe. 74% of Europeans state that corruption is a major problem in their country. But we haven't been seeing data on what actually happens. Now, in reality, Transparency International has provided us with such evidence which we haven't looked into deeply enough in my mind. So I've done an analysis of that data where people actually say that they have in proper polls, public opinion polls, they say that they have actually bribed someone in specific areas in the public sector. And they say we have polls on that for a number of years and from many countries, both within Europe and internationally. If you accumulate in a year the households that say that our household, I or someone else in my household, has actually bribed someone in the public sector, in a specific place in the public sector, you get at least 20 million bribes per year in the EU. I repeat the number because it is not easy to comprehend. 20 million bribes, petty bribes, because obviously you don't call the household of a big politician and he answers, yes, I have been there. Yes, 20 million bribes. That's what we think, that it is not possible. But that I wanted you first to comprehend. And this is the minimum base, because this is what people tell us that they have done. It's not what we think that they have done, it's what they tell us that they have done. And they don't tell it in general, they say in specific places. So we know that by the number of households that have answered, something like 600,000 households all over Europe have said that they have bribed the customs authorities. I refer to the customs authorities because we have financial interests of the EU in the customs authorities. Now, we pretend that this extent of corruption does not exist. We don't know the numbers, and we don't want to know the numbers in many cases. Because if we know the numbers, then we must do something about it. That's the difficult thing about numbers. Now, what is the impact? First of all, in EU financial interests. Now, this, I have to tell you that this is differentiated very much by sector and also by country. So there are countries, but I won't refer to countries, where you have almost zero corruption in many sectors. And there are countries where you might have 30% of the population experiencing a bribing experience each year in a specific sector. From those that have actually had contact with the sector. For example, the medical sector, public hospitals, has extensive corruption in many countries in Europe. And if you call it corruption or you don't call it corruption, it's paying doctors money for doing the things that they should have done anyhow in the public sector or in other cases. But you also have in many other sectors this phenomenon. Now, if we have corruption to that extent, what do we do about it? And how it affects us? I will start with how it affects EU financial interests. The sectors that we have answers about are not directly related to the EU financial interest apart from customs. But if you know that you have extended corruption in many cases in your public administration, and the whole administration of EU funds is done by the same administrations that have extended corruption using national funds, then it is obviously that you have a lot more corruption in EU funds than you actually realize. Nobody has asked the farmers whether they are involved in something like that. The Commission has not actually researched on that issue from the point of view of people that are actually involved massively. So we don't know, but we can suspect that a lot more than we see happens under our eyes. Now, how effectively do member states fight against corruption? There, the Commission admits that to date there is no mechanism in place monitoring the existence and assessing the effectiveness of anti-corruption policies at EU and member state level. And at international level, we only have GRECO, the Council of Europe, but there is limited visibility of GRECO in member states. Also, we know from OECD, which has a convention on combating bribery of foreign officials in international business transactions, that active enforcement of anti-bribery policy occurred in only 4 EU member states and little or no enforcement of this convention in 12 EU member states. I won't go into the how we deal with the issue in terms of our legal instruments, because we have a lot of legal instruments both at international and national level. My question is, how are these legal instruments used? Now, let's first look into how EU systemic pockets of corruption and fraud in member states' public administration. I will give you the Olaf cases. Someone said, I think Mr. Tavares said, that Olaf is effective. And I would read to you from the responsible EU Commissioner, Mr. Semeta. And I quote, "Since the year 2000, 281 out of 647 transferred by Olaf to national judicial authorities were dismissed." So half of Olaf's reports were dismissed. In the rest of the cases, the conviction rate was 41%. So in Europe, where we have 20 million bribes per year, we have maybe 150 cases convicted by Olaf's initiative in 10 years. So it's easier to buy a lottery ticket and get convicted and get the money than to be convicted. The reality. Now, what tools do they have? Differences in the legal framework of the member states, and I quote from the Commission here, and the resulting operational and organizational barriers to cross-border investigations within the EU mean that the financial interests of the European Union are not equivalently protected across the EU. And the Olaf director says, "We have already 1,300 incoming information per year. I am not in a position with cuts of the staff, etc., to additionally go around and looking for other information. Olaf does not have the legal basis, the staff and the power to make own initiative investigations. If we ask me to do, I would be happy. Now, how can I do that? I cannot. I cannot even go and look at the bank account of any investigated person. That's the reality of Olaf. Olaf does not do own initiative investigations. It investigates only incoming information. So if you manage, Olaf won't investigate you. End of story at this moment. And it does not have the staff, and it does not have the authority to do that effectively, because it cannot even open a bank account. It can only ask people. Commission has started to work, and quite seriously, to remedy this situation. But we are at very early stages at this moment. We have the first time the EU anti-corruption report that will monitor and access member states' efforts against corruption, which will be published every 2 years starting 2013. The Commission in June plans to put forward a proposal for a European Public Prosecutor's Office, the so-called EPO, and it has also starting with a proposal of a separate directive on the harmonization of procedural criminal law in the member states in 2013, and a proposal for the reform of Eurojust also in 2013. Important positive initiatives, which, however, I believe need a lot more encouragement from the part of the Parliament. What are the member states doing? Not a lot. Even in cases, I will give you only one case to understand why I say not a lot. Even in cases of bribing foreign officials, which involves essentially, in many cases, foreign officials of other member states' governments, okay, which has happened. The reaction of member states was very limited. In one member state where there has been some reaction, because in most member states this is not an issue, though it is observed, people have signed the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention for Foreign Officials. The results, and this is a very big member state, were thus. From 2005, and this comes from the OECD, to the end of 2010, 69 individuals were sanctioned, out of which 30 were criminally convicted and 35 were sanctioned under an arrangement under which they only had to pay fines and not be known to the general public, most of them. Out of the 30 convicted individuals, 23 received suspended prison sentences, and only 4 out of 69 served time in prison. And among the suspended prison sentences, 4 were convicted for especially serious cases of bribery of foreign public in these cases. So essentially, let's say a lot leaves to be desired in terms of what member states do. And there are, in member states, cases where you have whole sectors under systemic corruption, where the political system, and this comes from Transparency International, is involved and public employees are involved, And it's difficult to react, even for citizens in these member states, to react against this phenomenon. And this is a reality that many of us would like not to see. General observations and some specific in the end of the 19th century in the US, we had the progressive movement, and they built strong federal institutions to fight corruption that was widespread in the States. And we had the FBI and the IRS based on that. I believe we need something much more forceful when we introduce EPO in the next phase, next June and afterwards. Federal, let's say European in our case, authorities, to be able to break the vicious circle of systemic corruption in many sectors in member states. People, both those that want us to use their money well, mostly in the north, but also in the south or in the east, where many are caught in these traps of systemic corruption, want us to be a lot more effective. And we can do things to do that. I've overcome my time because I'm a bit passionate on that, but I have also specific proposals. The need to do something on something that we don't want to look into up till now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skylakakis. We'll have time for the specific proposals during the question and answer period. Just as a point of clarification, what I had said is that Olaf has important powers, whether it uses it effectively or not. I think that you have made a very powerful argument in one sense, but I'm not going to enter that discussion. Rather, we're going to complete the picture of the thematic papers with a presentation by our colleague, Mr. de Jong, on corruption by private companies disturbing the level playing field in the internal market.